Languages Act. That's our obligation to ensure. If there's other legal processes that will define whether or not that is adequate, God bless, go forward. But I think it's a tactical maneuver to prevent us from concluding. We have Rouleau's report, 900 pages. Are we really thinking, waiting 4 more years to have more translation will change anybody's mind or even be read? I don't think so. So I would urge colleagues to put aside the processes that we put forward to kind of pretend as though we're wanting to move forward when we're ragging the puck, and get more ambitious about concluding this committee so that before we rise in the summer, we've made our contribution. Because I think we adopt this motion, you can guarantee that we'll be meeting until the end of this Parliament.
Merci.
Thank you, Senator Harder. And now, Mr. Green, you have the floor.
I've certainly benefited from taking the time to listen to everybody's arguments. As you know, throughout this process, I've been fairly consistent on taking principal positions that I think are consistent with our party. And as a party that supported the invocation of the Act on its face value based on public information that was readily available, and while respecting the summary that was put in terms of the context, it seems that we always miss the context that there was an armed action in Coutts, one that I think that the average objective person would look at as a threat of terror, given its attempted targeting of police. And as somebody who has a long history of being critical of the police as an institution, in this particular case, I think it's incumbent on us to recognize the seriousness of that moment and what that could have meant across the country. Now, you'll also recall that throughout the 3 years, I've been fairly consistent in supporting demands for documents. I believe that the public has a right to know, to the best and fullest of its abilities, the same information the government side has had privy to that got to the rationale. And I would state, like right here on the record, that I think that through this process, the government has failed to articulate itself in a way that is consistent with the law as it's been explained to us by numerous experts. But I have to recall the frustration that I had prior to the revelation of the scope of untranslated documents, about us getting to a place that I think we were at 39 of 50 recommendations we had already voted on. Like, we were already there. And nowhere in Perrin and Beatty's, who I thought was perhaps one of our most learned experts, nowhere did I hear him say it's our mandate to be a book report club for Rouleau or any other judicial proceeding. That was not in the spirit nor in the language of any testimony that I've heard, and I think we've fallen into that trap. I think that the issue of translation is a serious issue, and I commend the senator for taking it through its obvious complaint and appeal processes as it relates to the commissioners and the Privy Council. But I would agree with Senator Harder that there is a translated version of the Rouleau Commission. And I can tell you, that I don't have the resources to sift through tens of thousands of documents. I don't think any of us do. And so at this point, I'm willing to accept translated documents as legislated through our Official Languages Act, and I'm ready to move forward. Now, I also want to honor the spirit of the search for documents and the search for particularly what are the threats to security and what's the threshold. I think that is a material issue that has to be addressed by this committee in order for us to have adequate recommendations that would hopefully modernize this act to contemplate the current social, economic, and political context that we're in that certainly wasn't contemplated back when Perrin and Beatty drafted this piece of legislation. And so what I would put to this committee as a way of trying to find that common ground is I do believe that Ms. Romanato, MP Romanato, don't sell yourself short in your short time here. This is a good motion that you've put forward. I think that there is concessions there in terms of the witnesses. because, like, let's be clear, we're offering a revisiting of witnesses in a way that we didn't consider during Rouleau. And if we're going to like really open all this back up, then let's hear from the folks who were, you know, held captive in the nation's capital here, the residents and all the other people who testified at Rouleau. Like, I don't think that makes sense for Rouleau, and I don't think it makes necessarily sense for this report either. But what does make sense to me, and I would put this to the movers of the motion, is if we break this up section by section, I'll tell you right now in this open session that Section A, subsection 2, which is your demand for documents, I support that. I've always supported that. And I think Canadians do have a right to know what were the legal thresholds the government was using to make this decision. I think that's material to our report, and I think that it would help dovetail into the work that we've already done, the 39 or so recommendations. I'm prepared to pick up where we left off, and I'm prepared to accept the Mosley decision as an appendix to this, as we did with the Rouleau in its translated version, and I commend MP Romanato and the Liberal side for agreeing to revisit the other folks. I know this, having worked on this for 3 years. Minister Virani is going to be a very learned member as both a participant of this committee and the new minister. And I think that these are the folks that are ultimately accountable under their new ministerial mandates. MP LeBlanc, I think that's great. But what I'm not interested in is kind of opening this back up. And I've expressed that both offline, and I'm going to say it in open public now. And for those that are watching, you know, before you get your fundraising emails, this is not a cover-up. This is a 3-year process that needs to come to an end based on a mandate that we have as a committee without any conspiracies. There's lots of time for folks to get their say in these upcoming appeals and civil proceedings. And I would just ask that we do find that common ground, that we break this motion up. That would allow me to support the demand for documents. And then as it relates to Section B, I think that subsection B and MP Romanato's motions are similar enough that I would be prepared to support MP Romanato's motion should it come to the floor next, after having supported the demand for documents. Those are my only comments that I'm probably going to have today. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Green.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I have on my list Mr. Brock, Senator Carignan, Mr. Mott, Ms. Romanado, and Senator Boniface, and I will add my name to the list. So, Mr. Brock, you have the floor. I see Mr. Brock. Do you want to give your turn to Senator Carignan? Yes,
OK. Non, Monsieur Mott a déjà parlé.
No, Mr. Mott has already spoken. The next would be Senator Carignan. If you'd like to come back after him, you can. Senator Carignan, I would like to come back to the motion. MP Romanado's motion. It's like a motion of closure because you want to invite the officials of the Privy Council to talk about what happened to the translation of documents, and we're asking Ministers Virani and LeBlanc to come. But after that meeting, no further witnesses would be heard from, and then the rest of our time as a committee would be devoted to drafting the final report. There's nothing on the testimony heard that was unilingual, or the witnesses that would come to complete that part of the evidence we don't yet have. There's nothing on the production of documents. There's nothing on the translation of those documents. The memorandum to invoke the emergency measures is not translated. Unilingual in English. We cannot be contented with that.
Merci, Sénateur.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Brock, are you ready to take your turn?
Mr. Motz, il était le prochain sur la liste.
Mr. Motz was next on my list, so you have the floor, Mr. Motz.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of reminders to the committee, some of which obviously you haven't had a chance to review everything. Mr. Maloney, you mentioned some comment about the committee. And I just want to refresh the committee's memory about the Senate law clerk's evidence that he provided to us early on about our mandate and what it is that we're supposed to be doing. Accordingly, the law clerk's evidence was, accordingly, this committee is master of its own affairs, subject to any direction from the House and the Senate. It can determine what information may or may not be relevant and necessary to the task it has been assigned, and it can determine whether a given line of inquiry is or is not within the scope of its mandate. In other words, the committee is within the rights to determine on its own whether any given line of inquiry or piece of information is relevant and necessary to its work. Additionally, the then House law clerk opined as follows, that while the mandate of the committee does not explicitly include the circumstances that led to the declaration being used, it will be for the committee to determine whether or not what extent consideration will be given. Now, what's interesting is there was another comment from the Senate law clerk said that, indeed, my understanding, among other things, that the role of the committee is precisely to look at whether the exercise of powers that were put in place is consistent with the Charter and other instruments. Additionally, my colleague, Mr. Carignan, he asked the question of Mr. Dufresne, the senator's interaction with the House law clerk, and then he said, we still need to review those powers to determine if they were appropriate or not. If the powers were taken on illegally, that may mean that they were exercised inappropriately. That was Mr. Carrignan's question. Mr. Dufresne, at the time, the senator's interaction with the law clerk, House law clerk, said, that will definitely be part of how you interpret your mandate. You will be able to ponder those questions, that is, try to determine whether the powers were exercised appropriately, the situation in which the powers were taken on, and whether it has been anticipated. So, I mean, I want to go back to the question of Section 62. 62 says that the exercise of powers and the performance of duties and functions pursuant to the declaration of the Act. I appreciate your comment, Mr. Maloney, in respect to you wondered whether we should even still be sitting after the fact. And, you know, in an ideal world, this wouldn't have had to be invoked. But when it is, the idea of this committee is to sit contemporaneously, as you said, at the same time as the government is trying to navigate this process. And our very purpose is to ensure that the government is following the law, not an interpretation of the law. They are following exactly what the law says. That was what our role would be if this was still going on and we met at the time. Additionally, the performance of duties and the functions. So the Act is very, very clear that it needed to be charter compliant. It needed to fit with the Section 2 of the CSIS Act for national emergency. There had to be a threat throughout all of Canada. And so our role, to me, is quite clear that that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be looking at whether or not the government acted lawfully and whether or not they were compliant with the Charter. That's what the mandate of this committee is, in my opinion. The exercise of powers is exactly that. Exactly that. Did the government act within their legislative powers to do what they did? And so I appreciate we might disagree, and that's okay. And I again appreciate the comments that have gone on. I too don't want to sit here for years to come, and I think we can get this done, expeditiously. I believe the Canadian public, who we are here to serve, deserves to know what it is that we are doing, why we're doing it, and that obviously there will be more than one version of a report. I'm confident of that. And so I guess the question needs to be asked, how long do we beat our heads against the wall to try and get a report that we can almost all agree to? And when do we say, you know what, this particular report does not align with what I believe the Canadian public deserves, and you know, you present your own. So I think that's just something that I wanted the new committee members to be aware. You know, I think we're going to be having having bells here very, very soon, from what I'm hearing, and I do respect Mr. Green and your suggestion that there may be some compromises, as we all said at the very front end. We need to look at what those might be, and if everybody's in agreement while we vote or whatever that looks like, we can maybe suspend for a little while and see how we might be able to come to some compromise from both sides. Sherry,
Merci.
both sides compromise.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brock. Sorry, Mr. Motz. And now, Ms. Romanado.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to cede my time to a senator who has not yet had an opportunity to speak. She's on my list. Senator Boniface, the floor is yours.
Thanks for all the comments. I started out thinking that we weren't going to get very far, and I think we are coming to an end. I have as well been here for almost 2 years, and I think that we need to think about the impacts of various decisions that will come. And I don't disagree on taking into account what Mr. Mosley has said, or Justice Mosley has said, but I also want to remind you what we have to work with. Justice Mosley's report's 190 pages. Rouleau's report's 2,000 plus pages. And as Senator Carignan has rightly commented on, that there's a number of the briefs that aren't translated. But we as a committee have had 26 meetings so far. This is meeting 27. We've heard from 66 witnesses ourselves. And we've spent multiple meetings drafting a report and recommendations that I would have thought we were getting near the end of. We were certainly beyond the halfway mark, to say the least. And I think that the work we've done around recommendations are actually very good and won't necessarily change. But I think that some of them won't, but we have to look at it through the lens of a new perspective, which is Justice Mosley. I have no problem with that. So I look at it, and I really like the comments of my colleague, Mr. Green, my co-chair. And I asked the question around legal opinions because we've asked for these already and not got them. We will have 2 ministers here, one of them who will be the Attorney General of Canada. We can, in our questions, ask him if he will produce those legal opinions. But my question is this, my point is this, Mr. Brock. We've asked for this already and been turned down, so we're asking again, and we'll have a Minister of Justice here who can answer the question yet again. I don't think his answer and the reply that we get is going to be any different. So so that's the only question I raise around those legal opinions. I think it's something that we may want to ask ourselves whether or not we're going through another exercise for not. And then the only other point I wanted to make is with respect to the reference to other witnesses in the motion put forward by my colleagues from the Conservatives, for me is so far open. Like Senator Harder, I feel like without knowing what that looks like, it seems like it's an endless exercise to me. So I want to reiterate, I think what I'm hearing from everybody around the table is that we want to figure out how we take all the information and all the work we've done over the 26 meetings and all of the material we have that we can work with and continue working on our report and recommendations in a way that introduces the new information around Justice Mosley's report and try to figure out how best to come to conclusions that are valuable for Canadians. Thank you.
Merci, Sénatrice Bonnier.
Thank you, Senator Boniface. And now it's my turn. Madam Senator, could you please chair the meeting while I ask my questions? I will let you chair in case you need to, call me to order. I will not repeat everything that's been said. But listen, we've had previous discussions on the production of documents. And I don't see an issue. I mean, I agree with everyone that we haven't seen an intention on anyone's part to offer a translation of all those documents. I've observed that, and I agree with Mr. Green that I'm not going, to be able to study, I don't know how many thousands of pages before starting to draft an opinion. If I have all those documents in French, I could choose which appear most relevant and which appear less relevant. But if my, selection is poor and I leave aside a document, I'll be the only one responsible and I can live with it. But I'm being told, tell us what document you want to see. But that exercise we did. You'll recall not so long ago, we said, seeing as we can't get, I don't know how many millions of pages, let's ask for an index. And once we get the index, we'll be able to choose. Although that, of course, is not perfect, but we could have at least have been able to see, well, that's not so interesting, that is interesting, and do that exercise. But we don't have the index either. I think it was, 16 million for the index, 300 million for the translation of the documents. Actually, I'd like to hear from a representative of the Privy Council to see how they made that assessment. It appears a huge amount. So I wonder, well, it's impossible to get the documents when in principle we should be able to work in either English or French. And I think Senator Carignan is right when he says it's not just a problem for the Francophones. Anglophones are also deprived because there was testimony in French and Anglophones did not see it. Now, would that have contributed to changing your opinion? We don't know, and you'll never know because you'll never read it. And that appears to me to be a problem that will affect the quality of our report because we haven't been able to perceive the entirety of the evidence. And I've said it already a few times. We've got to decide whether we want a bilingual parliament or not. We can't say we want it bilingual only when it doesn't cost too much. And if it costs too much to be bilingual, well, we'll have to then determine as of what amount it becomes too expensive to be bilingual. So I don't know. We can't, do without this. In a way, it's fundamental. But I think and with all due respect, Ms. Romanado, you have a very good motion, and I congratulate you, because for a newcomer to arrive, you seem to have understood what's at issue, and it's the issue of translation and the issue of Mr. Mosley's decision. With all due respect, I also think that it's, cutting the corners too much. As long as I don't know what the documents are at the Rouleau Commission, and once I should be entitled to, given the motion that was adopted, a year and a half ago? I can't, go about this in halfway. I can't select documents. I mean, I think Mr. Green, and with all due respect, I might be saying, he said, you can choose those documents you deem important. That's all very well. But if I don't know what documents are available, how can I decide, which ones are important? It's a bit like you tell your child, tell me, tell me what candy you want when he hasn't seen the kind of candies there are, and he doesn't choose the candy because he didn't know it was in the platter. In any event, I would need to hear from the Privy Council. I want them to explain, first and foremost, the story of hundreds of millions of dollars to translate these documents. I expect they'll give us convincing arguments. I look forward to hearing them. That's a first step. Then explore with the Privy Council what can be done so that it can at least get an index or a list of documents or a minimum amount of material with which to work to be able to identify the documents for which we need translation. I would bet probably that the report we draft will have to mention that we did not have access to all the documents. We might not have no other choice, but we can't be lazy at this stage. We have to be rigorous, try to get as much information as possible to draft a report that is most rigorous possible. And that's it for me, Madam Chair, for now. Ms. Romanado, I'll give you the floor. You're next on the list. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Given the fact that I think the last hour and a half we've been discussing and referencing my motion, I actually think it would be a good time to actually discuss the motion. And so I move that the committee proceed to another order of business, that being my motion.
Sur ça?
It's dilatory.
Oui, mais un point d'ordre, c'est ça, Monsieur Green?
Is that a point of order, Mr. Green?
Discussion, which was that we would take some time during our call for votes just to see if we can get some kind of common ground before proceeding to your order of business, because in doing that, we may be presupposing an opportunity to find common ground. And so I would respectfully suggest that happen after the votes rather than before. We're heading to votes now, right?
Madame Romanado, si j'ai bien compris.
Ms. Romanado, I've understood what you suggest is that we vote on your motion. No, I proposed a dilatory motion to change the motion before us, to stop discussing Mr. Brock's motion, but to discuss mine, to maybe find a formal way to go, because I haven't yet been able to speak to the motion. Well, then I'll ask for a little break. But I thought we have been discussing both motions in parallel from the beginning. Well, let's suspend 2 seconds, and I just